Gemara. Today's daf is daf tes. So today's Gemara is all about calculations, how to calculate the Churban Beis Hamikdash if you want to date something back to then. So basically what we learned was that the Malchus of Paras reigned for the first 34 years of the second Beis Hamikdash. The Greek Empire reigned for 180 years. The Chashmonaim reigned for 103, and the Hurdas reigned for 103. All of that equals 420. So if you want to work out when the Greeks took over, so 103 plus 103 is 206, plus 180 from the Greeks would be 386. So as we'll soon see, they used to tabulate the calendar. They used to calculate the years from the beginning of the Greek Empire. So it should be 386 years before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. But very important to remember, as we'll see in the end of the Gemara, that the first 6 years of the Greek Empire, they weren't much of an empire. They didn't have a hegemony of the whole area. Basically, they just controlled a certain limited place, Elam, and therefore those first 6 years don't count. So really, the beginning of the Greek Empire was 380 years prior to the Beis Hamikdash. Beis Hamikdash says the Gemara. And we said, and we proved this. Why we brought all this is to prove that the first 26 years of the Roman Empire, the Romans and the Eden were in cahoots. They were in a partnership until the Romans betrayed them. Says the Gemara, we're our first wide line. Amar Papa says Papa. Ibn Daftes Amar Aleph. Amar Papa says, I toy hai Tana. Let's say this particular Tana, the one who was learning the Brises, or the people who are learning the Brises, and V'layoda Proti. They know generally which century it is, but they don't know precisely which year it is. That since the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So what you do is l'shayla l'safra. This is what happened. All the scribes, when they used to date their contracts, they would date it to some empire. They would date it to the empire of the Greek Empire, and the Yidden, on the other hand, would date it to the Churban Beis Hamikdash. Remember, to remember the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So you don't remember which century it's in. You know what? Sorry, you know which century. You don't know which year it is. So you want to know which year you find yourself in. How many years ago? How many years ago was the Churban Beis Hamikdash? So how do you count? Excuse me. How do you calculate how many years ago the Churban Beis Hamikdash? So, because it was 380 years, so when a Sefer would say that this star is dated 400 years. What do 400 years mean since the beginning of calculation time of the Greek Empire? But the Greek Empire was 380 years before the Churban. So if you add 20, if you take off 20 years, and that's the takeoff. That's is to get rid of the 380, and then you know that it's what. We're going to add 20 years. By adding 20 years, so if they say 400 years, so we have to add 20 years, and we know that it's 20 years from the Churban Beis Hamikdash. 400 is 20 years of Churban Beis Hamikdash. So I want to papa. He doesn't know exactly Protikahavi. He doesn't know exactly precise here. Let him go to a scribe who normally dates it back to the Greek Empire. What he writes, the nitfolai es and shnin, and you just add. You know that they're calculating, and forget the hundreds. Get rid of all the hundreds. Just look at the details, and whatever year they have, just add 20 years, and you'll know that is 20 years since the Churban Beis Hamikdash. And then you're going to know exactly what year you find yourself in. We're now in the Testament about in the middle of the page, 3 lines and white lines. Okay, what happens? Because remember, the Seifrim, when they would write their story, they would calculate it back to the time of the Greek Empire, which was 380 years before the Churban Beis Hamikdash. And we want to calculate from the end of the Churban Beis Hamikdash, so you just have to add 20 years. And how do you remember that? Yaakov said, I was 20 years in your house by Lavan. So you add another 20 years. The other way around. The Sefer made a mistake, and he doesn't know exactly which year you're in. And the century don't matter, but the detail of the years. Then the Shai Tana, he asked the Tana, so how many years is it? And let's say the Tana says 20 years. The Tana is counting from the Churban Beis Hamikdash, but he wants 300. He knows that if we needed to get it back to the time of the Greeks and the centuries, you can work out. It's just it doesn't know which year it is. So then all you have to do is subtract 20, and you get to 380. Take off 20 from 100, you get to 80. So you get to exactly back to the year. Take over 20 years. He'll find his answer with Samanach. The way to remember it, Safra B'tzida Tana Tesva. That a Sefer generally tries to minimize the letters, and a Tana generally likes to add the letters. A Sefer tries to write as few letters as possible. And if he writes the way it's accurately the way it's in the Torah, sometimes the Torah has a chassid missing a yud, missing a vav, but the Sefer will write it exactly that way because the Sefer reduces. Mashenke in the Tana he adds. He has like Tosefta and Bryces. We have a Mishnah, but then you have all these other layers added on. So Tana adds, and the Sefer subtracts. So that's how you know the Sefer takes off 20 years, and the Tana adds 20 years. So along the same line, we learn the following: Tana Dve'Eliyo, Yeshiva Eliyo learned. We had Tana Eliyo a few days ago. Sheishes alofim shana havia olam. We had a machlekes Abaye and Christina. How many? Everyone agrees how long the world will exist. The question: how long will it be null and void? But here, 6,000 years of the world. Shnei alofim tell you the first 2,000 years is chaos. Shnei alofim Torah, the following 2,000 years is Torah, and Shnei alofim Yemei Mashiach, and the last is today. These 2,000 years, these 2 millennia is called Yemei Mashiach. Baba Neseinu Shirabu. This is with expressions you know the places. Baba Neseinu Shirabu. Unfortunately, we're already way into the 2,000 millennia, the last years of Yemei Mashiach. Mashiach still hasn't come. Baba unfortunately, Baba Neseinu Shirabu Yotzim Hem Mashiach. Whenever whoever said this, the years that went by into the last period of Yemei Mashiach went by. No, Mashiach should have come right in the beginning, just like as we'll see in a minute. Torah started right from the beginning. Over here also should start straight away from the beginning. Says the Gemara. Let's work it out. Shnei alofim Torah. When you say the 2,000 years, when do you calculate the 2,000 years? Everyone knows that Matan Torah happened in the year 2448. That's 448 years into the second period of you say this is the Tishnei Alaf Torah, but you lost out 448 years. How can it be? Matan Torah ad hashta leka kulahai. We don't have 2,000 years. If you can look into it today, alpha prata dehai alpha dehava. We have the 2,000, but it's the details. You're missing 448 years. Eli, you know when you start calculating from Avraham Avinu, but that's hanefesh asher osu b'chorin. Not when Avraham was born, but from when Avraham Avinu started making gadim to the Eibishter. Hanefesh osu b'chorin. That's years because Avraham then was 52 years old. He was born in the year 1948. So 1948 happened many years ago. He was born in that year. He was 52 years old. Actually, Machlek is when Avraham Avinu was makir, when he was makir, when he was 48 years old, when he was 3 years old, and then once he, especially was 48 years old, took a few years for him to settle down. At the age of 52, that's when he started being, mishpashis, Teda, and so on, Yiddishkeit. It says why that Noach was not successful. 120 years was building a ship. A boat, a Noach, and he couldn't get anyone to not one person to change their ways. Seeing this Noach is, his mamish was so committed. 120 years, and Avraham Avinu and Sarah, they were masliach, make the game everywhere was chilik. It says the word chilik is because Avraham Avinu saw as hanefesh as a he saw every person, he saw them as a nefesh. Who cares how they behave in b'chtzenius? The igazach is the previous, and therefore he lifted everyone up and he gave them, chayis and everything else. Mashiach Neach, he looked at the people and he judged them for what they were, and people don't like it. And they weren't engaged. He was 52 years old. So how much is it missing? If you calculate, it was missing 448 years from that second period of Shnei Lov Torah. But when you look in, and you calculate from when Avraham Avinu started to be making the Foshas and started until the Matan Torah was 448 years. So there you have it. That's when Torah began, when the journey began. That's perfect. It's exactly so. If you may, the second Shtei Alofim is Torah is 100% right. From the first day of Shtei Alofim started Torah. But interesting, when did Torah start? Not when Avraham Avinu learned Torah for himself. Either Ben Gimel Hikir or Ben Mem Ches Hikir. But that doesn't count. When did it start? When he started being Makar of other people. It's an amazing thing. Because the Gemara's way is learning right now is Bediuk. This is Mama's Bediuk, that it was Toyu until then. Even though Havram, just like the second 2,000 years, we wanted to start on time. We'll talk about the third 2,000 years in a minute. We wanted to start on time. The first 2,000 years ended on time. But Avram Avinu already was Ben Memches 4 years earlier, or Ben Gimel, 49 years earlier. That doesn't count. Because when you learn Torah only for yourself, doesn't impact the world. It's only that when you Lilmad that we say that's when Gizdi made a lot of Torah. Patana doesn't know exactly what year it is. Let's say when you say exactly how many years is it Matan Torah and so on, and you say now you make some Mashiach. You want to know how many years went by already since the beginning of the fifth millennium, and you want to know how many years already went into Yemais Mashiach and Achmos Mashiach hasn't come yet. And now a person doesn't make a mistake in the century. Centuries they know, but they don't know exactly precisely which year it is. They know it's the second century, third century, but you don't know precisely which year it is. So therefore, that Papa said, you want to know exactly which year it is. He doesn't know the protein, let him ask a sefer who counts from Malchus Yavon, and Kamal Kaziv, and Nitful Lion should add Aboyim Betamin. 48 years. 48 years. You add 48 years, and because there was two, and that will tell you because they count from and it'll solve all your problems. Because the Churban Beis Hamikdash happened in the year 3828. That's the year it have now counted. You have to add 172 years. You have to add 172 years to get the Sheil of Sheil of Torah. But the Sefer, when he counts 380 years before the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So if you add 380 and 200 and 172, you get 552. When the Sefer says it's 552 years, he's counting from the Malchus Yovan. And we want to start not counting the year. For us, the new millennium starts 552 years after the years of the Sefer. But we don't care about the fives. It's only the 52 years. So if we deduct 48, you get whatever number they have. You deduct 48, you get the whole number. The Simonach, and remember again, our boyim v'shmoyne is. To remember that there are 48 cities are in Miklat. So that's how you remember the number 48. The Toy Safra. If the Sefer made a mistake, then he knows just to add, and he relies on our cheshbon, he knows he has to add 52. In the Shaila the Tana Kamal, somebody learns, so how many years is it since he makes a Mashiach? And you discount by 48. Remember why a Sefer deducts and why a Tana adds. Safra B'tzida Tana Tesra. A Sefer generally is very medactic in the letters that are missing. He makes sure he deletes them. And Mashenki, those who learn, they keep on adding. Trisefta and then Brises and everything, we keep on adding. Rav Huna B'rei Rav Yeshua. So since we're talking about how to calculate years, that was a papa. So comes along as Chavrusa Rav Yeshua, and he says, Hai Mandala Yoda Kama Shana B'Shua. When the Beis Hamikdash, we have a Kabbalah that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed 1 year after Shemitah. The Beis Hamikdash was destroyed 1 year after Shemitah. Now there's a machlekes we have Rabbi Yonah Chachamim. When you count Shemitahs and Yevus, is the Yevel separate from the Shemitah cycle, or is it part of the Shemitah cycle? In 100 years, according to Chachamim, two Yevus and 2 cycles of 49 years. 49, 50th years Yevel, then the year following you count 1, 2, 3, 4. And so, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, in a 100-year cycle, he said that Yovel is the first year. After the 49 years, next year is Yovel, which also is the first year of the new cycle of Shemitah. So he holds that Yovel is part of it. So in a 100-year, in a century, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have 2 full cycles plus 2 years going into the next round. Okay, so how do you calculate the Shemitah? You don't know, you can't remember which year of Shemitah is it. Second year of Shemitah, third year, fourth year of Shemitah. How do you calculate? He doesn't know exactly which year of Shemitah he stands. So first, I have to add 1 year, because I just told you that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed 1 year after the Shemitah. The Nachshav, and then you count Kloli b'Yovel Proti b'Shua. You count, if you take 100 years, you know right away that in 100 years you have 2 leftovers. You have 2 years left over going into a next cycle of Shemitah, because in 100 years you have two cycles of 49. According to Rabbi Yehuda, which is what it follows, the Yabel is included in that cycle of 49. So therefore, for a century, there's 2 extra years, and then how many centuries. So you have to add one. You have to add 1 year. Talk about you have to add 1 year from that Shemitah that the Beis Mikdash was a year after the Shemitah, and then plus every century add another 2 years, and you keep on adding until you get to the number of which year Shemitah year is. The Nishkol Memeya today, you deduct from 102, going into another cycle of Shemitah. Then Shodah Prati, then Achshidol Prati Bishua, you add up all the Pratim to make it 7 years, Yeda Kamashani Bishua. Similar to remember that you have 2 years, every 100 years, you have to take 2 years off and count it towards the next Shemitah. Kizesh Nasai Marov, be care about it. It's already 2 years that is a hunger in the land by Yosef Tzaddik. This Gemara is very complicated, because when they came back to Israel in the 1880s, when Rothschild gave over land, and they then came a real shaila about Shemitah and Yabel, the way we keep Shemitah today does not fit into this Gemara at all. And they all try to understand what's going on. How do we get our cheshbon here? Some want to say this whole Gemara is going to cause Rabbi Yehuda. If you follow Chachamim, then obviously the whole cheshbon is different. But then the cheshbon again doesn't work out. Others want to say that the Beis Hamikdash was on Tisha B'Av burnt. So that's considered. The question is that considered another whole year, or is it like 2 years? Do you start counting from the Churban Beis Hamikdash as the years, or do you wait till Tishrei and start counting years from then? When do we say the Churban Beis Hamikdash was? Was it 70 year 69? Because you still have 2 more months. So how do we count that? Is that already a year, a whole year? So when in the next year Rosh Hashanah, it becomes already 2 years of the Churban Beis Hamikdash, or do we say that no, it's all 1 year? Just like the same Chakira by Adam Rishon. How you calculate the world in Kufa is a big machlekes, because Adam Rishon was born on Rosh Hashanah. So the first 5 days, is that a separate year? When we say the world is 5,785 years old, so we have 5 days as a year, and then it starts the next year, or is it all part of the first year? And it's the gates of Kufas I made the calculations, and the Shem HaMachlekes. So anyway, same thing here. Now, very interesting. Yemei Mashiach. Just like we said, Yemei Teda has to be accurate. The beginning of that cycle, beginning of that second period, the very first day, and we make a cheshbon. How is it possible when the Matan Teda was 2,448? So we worked out that Avraham Avinu was 52 years old, and that's when it started. But he says over here, Rabbi Chanina said, we believe this tradition that the Mashiach will come 400 years after the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So another 172 years from the Churban Beis Hamikdash to the end of the millennium of Yemei Teda. And then you add another to get to 400, you add another 228 years to get to the Zman of Bias Mashiach. And you have to have such a moon and Bias Mashiach. If a person comes over to you and says, I'm willing to sell you a field that's worth 1,000 zuz, buy it for 1 zuz. He said, Al tikach. Don't take it. Why? Because we're all moving to Yisrael, to Yerushalayim. Mashiach is coming now. Why should you lose the dinner? So what happens? I see that Yisrael is Pasha Chalarotzis, whatever. But I mean, there's a truth like a Moshe that are you allowed to buy life insurance? If you believe Mashiach is coming, you have to believe. And then buying life insurance means you don't believe. You're doing a Maisa. And he wrote, very strongly, you have to live in the ways of the world and so on. The Gemara right here says you got an unbelievable deal, buy a piece of property, and Chutz La'Orez, don't buy it. But why not? So I won't live in Chutz La'Orez. I live in Yisrael. But I'm not allowed to own property outside of Yerushalayim, outside of Yisrael. But I guess it's a chesed in your emunah. It's how strong the emunah was then. As Rashi says, they would sorry, but nothing is cheap in Yisrael. It says they would tikabetz lahar hakodesh l'nachal v'secha. It's what Rashi says it. Like not we live in Yisrael. We're all going to live around the mountain. We're all going to live in Yerushalayim. So Beloma tafshid hadin. Why lose a dinner? Okay, so you might the Mastin good Rachel and similarly after 4,231 years. So they add this brisa almost similar before, but he adds 3 more years. According to Rabbi Chanina, it's 228 years into the Mesa Mashiach. That Mashiach is definitely coming, and according to the Braisa, it's 231 years that is coming. Whereas even though the kind of house buy this property for one dinner, I'll take out the buy it. My benai, what's in the price of Chanina? You keep an eye flash on it. There's three different cheshbon. The masnit the tafya flash on it. The mission, the Braisa adds 3 more years to Zman Hagos. Even though it says that all those Kachashve kitzin, the bones and so on, everything else. Interesting, the Rambam writes in one of those letters. He says he makes fun of those Kachashve the kitzin, and then he himself puts his own kitzin at the very end. And yeah, every so many tzaddikim gave different ketzim. I remember even in Tafshin Lamed Vav, there was a ketz that commanded that said that Moshe doesn't come top of the Vav, burn all my svarim, and so on. Tafresh Ches was a man of Gula. The title was printed, but a lot of times the man of Gula, the time or whatever the ketz, the terrible service. So, as I always say, that the time was ripe, but the generation wasn't grow. So the Barbanel and Malbim says very nicely. So why bother saying? You know that it's what are you doing? It's like false hopes. In fact, there was in Tuf Reish Chof in Poland. Everybody told Mashiach was coming that year. So people were selling their shops, giving everything up. They're getting ready to go move to Israel. So that Rosh Hashanah, before Rosh Hashanah, they're all getting ready. So there was a big Rebbe called Uri Mistrelisk, and he got up and he passed on his Mashiach is not coming this year. It was a Beizaku, but people then stopped selling and everything else and then later on he said to the Chassidim, explained, if Mashiach does come and I'm wrong, what do I care? But at least by me saying that, they're not going to give up their lives and abandon everything, and then whatever the Chas V'Shalom Mashiach doesn't come, what do they have left? So let them blame me. At least they can still keep on living. I was going to say what Malcolm said, the listeners you already. I wish I would have started because it was written Shit Shanin. You said there was that you write dates, and it seems that the date was 6 years in the future, right? It was 6 years in the future, like a Star Ma'ucher, and which is very nice of the Malva. The Malva is sort of saying to the Levi, you know what? Anything you sell from now for the next 6 years, I have no right to collect. If you don't pay me, I can go to the Chasam Shabadim, but I can't because the date on the star is 6 years hence, right? So I'm doing you a favor. So they thought that this is a star mucher. Shal Shitini, you said, there were 6 years extra written later on. For example, there were 5. Remember, we learned before that they used to date everything, the Seifrim, back to Malchus Yavin. Even after the Romans took over, they continued dating things with the Greek Empire. And so it was, let's say, it was 500 years from the date from the Greek Empire took over. And it said on the star 506 years from the Greek Empire, which is a Chayda star Mucher. So that's sort of what I come in that this is a delayed star. So very good, so that he cannot be traded, he cannot collect any properties for another 6 years. Rab Nachman said, no. Hanach, Safra Dukna Kosa, this cipher was very, very accurate. I told you before that even you look at the Cheshbon, it's actually 386 years before the Churban Beis Hamikdash, because 180 plus 103 of the Chashmonaim, 103 of Hurdus is 206 plus 186. And the whole time we've been saying the whole Gemara, that's 380 years from this man, the Beis Hamikdash, the Churban Beis Hamikdash, 380 years from this man of the Yevanim. And that is because the first 6 years they were not yet in control. They didn't dominate many, many countries. And therefore we don't count that. But this Sefer was very pedantic. If you write, you said, if I write from the rise of the Greek Empire, then I should write from the beginning of it. So, that's 6 years is when they started out. And they ruled another country outside of Greece. They ruled Elam. The Nailech has been Louis, don't calculate it as, the empire. He considered therefore it's the right time and you can use the star to collect property now. Because the chances that you delay a star for 6 years is very, very rare. Why would you do that? Why would the Malva give up, his rights? Then why bother putting in a star? Why would he do that? The Tanya Beishemer. Basically said, Sheshani Malka Be'elam, 6 years they ruled in Elam. And only afterwards they mispashed all over the world. Even though two dots is part of the Gemara.